do you want like, are you competitive? Like, do you want a competitive edge? Because like, if you're like a business owner and you want to, or you like are an equity analyst and you want to know like where the markets are going, why not just look at the lunar cycle, which many people have proven that like the full moons and the new moons are correlated with certain price increases and drops. It's like, that's more data, right?
So what are some of the misconceptions you have encountered, and how can we start busting them so that people can actually use astrology in a uplifting way?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, astrology is actually an essential field of knowledge, like for everybody to understand how our society developed, why we even like astrology is at the bedrock of everything. It's like why we have a 7-day week. It's why we have 12 months. And like some of these are artificially manufactured, right? Like we don't necessarily maybe need to have a 7-day week, but the point here is that like even at a starting point, like if astrology as a conditional, if astrology were to be completely fabricated, like even on those grounds, astrology should be taught in schools because like we need to understand like how our society and our culture developed because it's all grounded in astrology, right? The architecture, again, the days of the week, the months, and so my question to myself that I always ask is like, why did the educational system stifle astrology? Because it's not actually integrated at all. Because at least not in where I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, like I never encountered astrology as like a discrete subject of like we're going to talk about this today. It never came up in historical documents that we were reading in our history classes. It was basically shut out, and you have to wonder why. And I think that that's a whole different discussion, which I don't necessarily like have an answer to. But the misconception basically is that astrology like sprung out of the ground, out of nowhere, like just like thousands of years ago, and that we've just like decided to pick it back up in a moment of hysteria. So there's like a lot of judgment around astrology because people assume that someone can only believe in astrology if they're hysterical. And that gets into, and I'm using that word like very intentionally there because I think that there is even like a bit of a stigma around astrology of like, for example, that like men shouldn't be into it,
Yes, I
and that
wanted to get
if
into
men are
that
yeah,
because
yeah,
there is such a
yeah, and
misconception around that. People are like, "Oh, a guy astrologer on Livecraft." I'm like, "Yes. Yes, it's not
yeah,
just
yeah,
crazy
yeah,
women that do all these mystical things. Men have been at the like foundation of astrology,
yeah,
if you understand the history. Please get into
yeah.
that. I got so excited when you mentioned that because it's such a misconception.
Yeah, yeah. So, and there are plenty of astrologers, like of male astrologers. However, a lot of them are like on YouTube, and they kind of like don't necessarily like jump into like the TikTok side of things. I have no idea why, but I think that's just how it's playing out right now. But my point here is that like astrology is so ingrained in our society, I mean all societies across the globe, that it is essential even like objectively to learn in school. However, it's also been stereotyped and stigmatized because of, let's call it like the newspaper horoscopes that developed in the 20th century. So there were newspaper horoscopes that would talk about just your sun sign. So like if you're a Scorpio, you're dealing with this week. But it's like the reality is in the textbook tradition, the technique is to actually look at the rising sign for the most part for like forecasts. And so we've just kind of bastardized in a lot of different ways, and it's been diluted to the point where it can be mocked and it can be ridiculed, but it's almost a straw man argument. So like I was on one of my favorite activities lately is to just like go on Twitter and like watch like these finance bros like attack astrology. And this even happened last night. So it's like I was watching this conversation, which was just absolutely nonsensical, where like these people were saying like, how can this business, even like thrive as an astrology business or this app? And I'm like, you realize that like astrology is useful and has been validated, but like they're coming at it from such a point of naivete, that it's like you have to wonder how we got here. Like I'm less concerned about like who are these people and like are they good or bad? Like I don't really care about that. My point is more like how are we so dysfunctional and unaware in a society where like half of our consciousness is dormant? It's dormant, meaning it can come back. Like we all have an attunement to natural rhythms and cycles. Like we, in prehistoric society, it's like we were almost kind of like immersed in nature to a point where we realized naturally, almost intuitively, when the seasons were changing, where the sun was angling, what the contours of meaning were related to the constellations. And, it's almost like imagine you're a tree for 2000 years. If you were a tree for 2000 years, you would be an astrological genius because you would be in touch with the rhythms. But we live in such a organized society that we've lost touch with our inner nature. And so again, it's all there. And so it's like my question is, how do you reactivate everyone's inner astrologer, which is really just to say, really your, and it's not even, doesn't even have to be a spirit, right? It could just be like your inner sort of instinctive side, but like it's reinforced. The other side of ourselves, the analytical side, is reinforced to a point where we're disconnected. So my goal, and this is pretty ambitious, so bear with me, but like my goal is to have astrology like just reintroduced into the education system from the ground up. So, in primary school, secondary, etc., like everyone should have a basic fundamental understanding of like what are the signs, what are aspects, what is the birth chart, because as a philosophy major myself in college, it's like all these like philosophers I was reading about were astrologers too. But they talked about it in the text that we were reading, but our professors, despite the fact that they are supposedly have these like PhDs and like 10 years of studying philosophy, they never brought up the fact that they were astrologers, what they believed about the constellations, because we live in such an analytical society that like we completely discredit it. But again, my mission is to synthesize the analytical and the intuitive and bring in people who are just like me. Because up until 2000, like late 2000, like really 2020, I would have told you the same thing. I would have said like astrology is nonsense because I'm a Scorpio. And guess what? I have a friend who was born in the same month as me or the same time period as me, and they're not the same. And it's like, that's not the point, right? Like,
yes, I could not relate to any Cancer. Like, no Cancerian trait. I was like, yes, I cry easily and quite often, and I enjoy it more than the average person. But I used to think about people just like you said that were born in the same month or with the same star sign and think I'm nothing like you and I don't relate to that. And I can cry a lot, but I'm not that nurturing. And and I have this other side to me that I didn't understand because I thought it was just encapsulated in that one sun sign, star sign. So what are some of the things? Like I figured it out for myself because I'm a Gemini rising. So it made sense that I just wanted to chat and be analytical and look at things and take in information in that way. But if people are listening and they have no idea, but they want to kind of get into astrology, what are some of the main things that they need to start looking at or getting their natal chart done? What are the most important aspects that they might need to take a look at just as a beginner?
Yeah, so you're asking me this at the right time because I literally just figured out kind of how to explain and articulate astrology in like 30 seconds. So I've been trying to do this for a while because I was like, how can I explain it where it's like it's stripping away all of the details? And so astrology really comes down to really one concept. So it's mapping a cyclical process. So number one, it's cyclical, but that cyclical process is it's about self-development and then actualization and then release. Those are the three pillars of astrology. And that happens in a cyclical fashion. So it's like ideally you are developing yourself, you're manifesting, then you're releasing back to source in a way, but like you're upcycling, meaning you're evolving. And the way that these cycles occur is through duality. And duality is the reconciliation of opposites. So it's like the same question that like, someone would ask you, what makes music possible? You would say time, right? And what makes astrology, what makes the cyclical process possible? You could argue time, but also duality. So when you have night versus day, the sun versus the moon, you have east versus west in the horizon. You have, even like in mundane reality, hot versus cold, whatever. Like duality is what gets the gears spinning. So now these things are spinning. It's like home and work, you and the other person. Like every zodiac sign operates on a polarity or an axis as well. So it's like not actually 12 signs. To me, it's really just 6 pairings. So like Aries is the self, Libra is the other, Scorpio is like other people's possessions, Taurus is personal possessions, and et cetera, et cetera. Like you can keep going through that, but if you just build from that bedrock, it really explains the signs, the houses, the planets, the aspects, like literally everything. And so to me, it's like, and sorry to layer one more thing in about astrology. Astrology is also alchemy. So it's like the alchemization of the celestial and the terrestrial. So that's where we get this phrase as above, so below. So even that, though, is a duality, right? So it's like you're still manifesting in the earth plane, in the 3D, but you're also liberating upward and through this process of ascension and enlightenment. So a lot of people think that like astrology is exactly like a fanatical religion where it's like divorced from reality, where it says like, well, you should just wait for an afterlife. Like that's not astrology, right? Like that's another area that's conflated. Astrology is actually more empowering than what maybe a mindless, let's call it, agent of the matrix might think. So if we're talking about someone who's just like a financier who has no belief system outside of like making money, it's like they're not gonna like realize that they're only focused on manifestation, right? Manifestation of wealth, but they're not like karmically disentangling themselves. They're not like ascending upward. So astrology is actually still about free will. It's like you're still manifesting because there's a lot of people, by the way, in the spiritual community who will say like, I claim this energy. And it's like they just try to claim and cherry pick good energy and not do anything.
No.
So it's like astrology is actually very an active process of like you have to do the work every day. You have to show up, but you have to concentrate and meditate on where do you want your soul to go. So it's about soul evolution and a sort of earthly evolution as well of like the actual mind, body, soul, the Trinity, etc. Like we as astrologers are trying to help people do that. So like keep people grounded. So I give advice in sessions where it's like you should actually, think about this in terms of like your day to day, but in a high level, you should think about like your purpose in this way. So it's like we're kind of meshing all these things together. So astrology is duality. It's a cyclical process of self-development, actualization, and release. And you can even hear it, right? Like it's a rhythm. It's a rhythm.
Yeah,
and even this podcast has a beginning, middle, and end, right? So like even that, there's an Aries moment of this podcast at the beginning. There's a Libra moment in the middle. It's and a Pisces moment at the end. Like it's something like where if you really want to be into astrology, it's almost like it's just like it's really just a blueprint you're adding on top of like the reality you already have. So what I will say though is if you're looking to get into it, you should start with the sun and moon and the rising sign. So that's the big three, and that really does speak to the car, so to speak. Like if you're the car, it's like that's the car plus the personal planets, which is Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the sun is your conscious self. So that's what you express in the world with your identity. The moon is the internal self, the unconscious. So it's like your emotions and your moods. Like you can't really control the moon. And the rising sign is really like your persona. It's also the body itself. It's like the birth. So it's like you came in through the eastern horizon. So the rising sign is like really your mission. I think it's really your mission in this lifetime. So it's like if you're a Cancer rising, like me, it's like theoretically you are here to like nurture people in some way, but also to nurture yourself and maybe even like parent yourself over time. If you are a Leo rising, then your initial instinct is to express the self, like kind of showcase your talents. So anyways, if you're really new to this, number one, think about those three, but then just keep in mind that if you don't resonate with your sun sign, like there's probably other things in the chart that are activating that, right? That are causing that. So if you're a Cancer, for example, Cancer sun, but that sun is in a 90-degree angle with Uranus, which is a little bit advanced, but like we'll just just take that as a fact, right? Like if someone has that, then they actually might be more of an Aquarius kind of, because Uranus rules Aquarius. And so they might be more scientific, more detached, actually. And there's plenty of tech entrepreneurs, actually. There's a couple tech entrepreneurs who have a Cancer sun, but it's squaring Uranus, and they don't come across as Cancers. They actually come across as like very like utilitarian, but like to a problematic extent. So anyways, that's really the nuts and bolts of it. And and one thing I want to address though is like twins. Like what happens if you have twins, for example? Like does that invalidate astrology? And if you have two people who are both Pisces, right? Like Pisces, like astrology is about archetypes. So it's like one of those twins could be religious or like a preacher or something, which is perfectly Piscean. And another one could be an addict. That's perfectly Piscean too. So like Pisces is all about like getting back to the source in the collective, but it's like, how are you doing that, right? Like some people are going
Mm.
to just watch television all day. Some people are going to fall into addiction. Others are going to become musicians, filmmakers, or, you know, running a meditation retreat. So like that's, but it's all fitting that theme of Pisces, right? So that's how astrology works. It's not like meant to be, um, like literally like this is the only path for your sun
Yeah.
sign or whatever. Like it's more rich than that.
I love the way that you describe that, and it takes me back to when I just started learning about it, and I realized that it's so much more than just like I always say astrology is not a personality test. It's not just going to tell you who you are and what your personality is. It's way more complex than that. And so many people just look at astrology in regards to their personality, but it can actually be used as a tool to, like I found, make life better, make me understand life more, understand why people might be a little reactive at the moment, and why things are happening in the collective as they are, and why I'm going through certain transits. Because as you get more into astrology and you understand the houses and all of the things that kind of get lit up in your life at certain times, like this year, I was knocked over because I was like, planning 2021 since, oh no, I was planning 2022 since 2021. And then my entire 12th house got lit up by all of the eclipses. And I was like, oh, yata. Okay, no. Like everything just shifted. And I was like, inward, inward, here I go. And like just going through all the motions in that regard. So if someone wants to start understanding and using astrology to make their life better, where should they start except for your podcast, which they should listen to every week because I do too, and it really helps.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that where people should start is again like I would start by just meditating on like your innate instincts. So like everybody has an inner astrologer within them. Like that is already programmed. It's in our like sort of generational DNA. So the thing that you should ask as a starting point is like, how does my current routine and culture that I live in kind of divorce me from that possibility? So do I feel like going into an office and sitting under fluorescent lights all day, is that stifling my spirit? Like it probably is, right? And or do I feel like I'm focused on things that are like not that are too materialistic or something, because again it's about alchemization. So are you too focused on the manifestation of the on the earth plane but not focused on ascension, or are you too focused on ascension, by the way? Because again, some people can go too far the other direction where it's like the afterlife is all that matters, blah, blah, like whatever. And so as a starting point, just try to balance yourself. And I think that's a perfect way to think about this during the Libra season we're in right now. So it's like it's all about the middle path. So are you on a middle path right now? And if not, just try to get yourself there first and then venture into astrology. Because if you venture into astrology from a scientific, purely materialistic lens, it's not going to like actually resonate with you that much because you're not activating your entire consciousness. So that's where we're heading, by the way. So we're almost into the age of Aquarius. Astrologers disagree on when this is occurring, but I feel strongly that it's only a few years away. And so when the age of Aquarius comes, I think that many people are going to be turning on their entire consciousness because we only use, I'm not a scientist, so take this with a grain of salt, but I'm pretty sure we only use like a small fraction of our brain. Like that's what I've come to learn over the years. So what I think though is that there is a dormant consciousness that's being, we're going to articulate that again. So my advice actually is to get into astrology now while you still have some agency in that process, because I think once we hit the age of Aquarius, everyone's just going to be accelerated onto that path anyways. And it's like if you are caught flat-footed in that, it might be overwhelming. It might be overstimulation of like, why am I feeling like this? Like, why do I feel like all of a sudden connected to something etheric and not purely terrestrial? And it's like, well, because like we are all going through this collective evolution. Like that's how astrology also works. And I'm an evolutionary astrologer, by the way. So I believe that the outer planets are gaining strength over time. And as we discover more about them, which by the way, we just got a new picture of Neptune from NASA.
I know. So pretty.
Yeah, It's so pretty, and it's like that's our collective consciousness coming into a greater awareness of what Neptune means, and it corroborates the meaning of Neptune actually, because Neptune is about magic and mysticism. And when
So
you look at
dreamy.
Neptune, yeah, you can see it. It's all
You can
it
see it.
actually inspires. I'm sure there's somebody who wrote a song based on this picture of Neptune, right?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what Neptune wants us to do. So it's like we are beholden to these archetypes, these planetary rhythms. So it's like you might as well learn it so that you're not out of control. And and
Yeah.
and that's what I always tell my friends who are skeptics. So my friends who are still in Manhattan, they're still doing the daily grind, whatever, right? Like I'm not going to judge them for that.
Mm.
But I will tell them, it's like, do you want like are you competitive? Like do you want a competitive edge? Because like if you're like a business owner and you want to, or you like are an equity analyst and you want to know like where the markets are going, why not just look at the lunar cycle, which many people have proven that like the full moons and the new moons are correlated with certain price increases and drops. It's like, that's more data, right? That's salient
Mm.
data. And if you want to think about it as data and like take a cold view of it, which I don't necessarily think is the right way to go about it, right? Because I don't think astrology can be just, quantified or
Mm.
codified. But it's like if that's what it takes to get you in the fold, then like by all means, like just start from that. And it's like I have clients like that. I have clients who are just like in the business world and they're like, Evan, like I'm only coming to you for that edge.
Yeah.
I just want to know more information about like what's coming for me, meaning like when am I more likely to move homes? When am I more likely to be agitated? When am I more likely to be totally balanced?
Yeah.
And how can I work accordingly? So anyways, if you're looking to, kind of just dip your toes into astrology, I think there's many rivers that lead to the same ocean. Like I teach an introductory course every few weeks now. Like I just kind of reactivate it because it's been really resonant. So it's like you could just take a course where learn it from the ground up. You could read an introductory book, just like what are the signs. You could, again, I think people should approach it from again, this process of alchemy, where it's like you
Oh,
are
I like that.
combining something that's something that's like material with something that's quote unquote divine. And I know that's a loaded term. And I'm not even saying divine from a religious standpoint, right?
Mm.
Because that's not my angle. It's more about again, it's the ultimate hubris to think that we've already like that our society has already figured everything out pretty much. Like we already
Yes.
know that because Mars is millions of miles away, it has no effect on us. Like that's not true, right? Like we
Mm.
know that there are potentially other dimensions beyond the fourth dimension. We know that there are frequencies that are so subtle that like are, just because we can't see it, we can't even maybe feel it in our like immediately in our bodies. It's like if you meditate on it for long enough, you can you can be introduced to those subtleties, right? So I
Yeah.
think it's just like a lack of stamina on the part of some people, on the skeptics. Like they just don't have the stamina to investigate it or the concern or the care. So